Welcome to Nearpod Lesson 5.7, Naming Covalent Molecules. So, a gentle reminder to title your notes this, and by the end of this video, this is the key thing you should know. So, just to review what we've discussed so far, we know that when elements combine to form molecules, there are two types. There are ionic molecules made of a metal and a non-metal elements, and their structure tends to look the same. And there are covalent molecules, which are only made up of non-metal elements sharing electrons, and they tend to be the ones that look like this, right? So any organic matter. We also know that ionic molecules are made up of at least one metal and one nonmetal, while covalent molecules are only made up of nonmetal elements. And additionally, when we name ionic and covalent molecules, they're also a tiny bit different. So on this slide, since you already should have the definition of these two from a previous lesson, I would just note that the naming system of these two are a little bit different, right? So I'd list some examples and note that ionic molecules kind of look like this, and covalent molecules kind of look like this. Something that they both have in common, as you compare the ionic names with the covalent names, is that when they show that they're together or bonded together, they all end in "ide," unless I'm dealing with a polyatomic ion where it ends in 8, right? But for the most part, they share the ending "ide" because "ide" lets us know that these are two or more elements that have bonded together. Something that's unique to covalent molecules are these little prefixes in front, like di, mono, tetra, and tri. Right? So if I ever see things like that, that's a hint to me that I'm looking at a covalent molecule based off of the naming system. And let's talk about why we have these prefixes next. So normally, when we're dealing with ionic molecules, we can use the charges to help us identify what the formula would be based off of the name. But with covalent molecules, we can't really do that because when they combine, they're just bonding their single valence electrons with another element to form an electron pair, right? So we need these prefixes, this di, mono, tetra, tri, to let us know in advance how many of each elements we have. So if you know a little bit of Greek or a little bit of Latin, some of these prefixes, like tri from tricycle, might seem familiar to you, right? Tri meaning 3, right? And mono meaning 1. You might know, but maybe not as much, that di means 2, right? So dihydrogen is just H2. I have 2 hydrogens. Monoxide, mono meaning 1, 1 oxygen. So dihydrogen monoxide is just H2O. Probably could have drawn that better. H2O. So let's discuss in detail the naming conventions of how covalent molecules work. So in order for you to name a covalent molecule, I first need to give you a formula. So for example, we have NF3 to work with, and these are the 2 steps for naming. Right, so step number 1, we're going to find the name of each element using the periodic table. So here I have 2 elements. I can tell there are 2 elements because I see 2 capital letters, right? So capital N means I have this element N, and then I see capital F next to the number 3, so I have 3 of the Fs. If you don't know what these names are already from doing so much chemistry, you can always check your periodic table. N is here, so this is going to be nitrogen. And F is here, so this is going to be fluorine. All right, so N and F, nitrogen and fluorine. So now that I've figured out what N and F are called, right, the naming convention kind of goes like this as follows, right? So the prefix kind of tells me how many of each element I have, right? And these are all the Greek prefixes written here, right? Again, some of this is in Latin. So if I have one of that element, I'm going to call it mono. If I have two of that element, it's going to be di and then the name, three, and then tri. All right, so here I know that this is called nitrogen. Whoops, wrong color. And notice that I only have one nitrogen because there's no subscript here, right? So notice also in the notes that we only add the prefix if there's two or more of the element. So since there's only one of that element, we don't need to add the prefix for this one. So F3, F is called fluorine. But reminder that for this name and the ending, it's going to be the name without the last syllable. And we're going to add "ide" instead. So sounding this out, fluorine is my second syllable. Cross this out, so it's going to be fluoride. Right, so fluoride is the actual name of these two elements bonded together. And you'll also notice here the prefix is always written, right? So the prefix again tells me how many of the elements fluorine I have. So notice we have three fluorines. So my prefix for three is going to be tri. So if I put every single thing together, the full name of NF3 is going to be nitrogen trifluoride. Right? So the prefixes go with the word as if it were one word. Right? So nitrogen trifluoride is the name. So on this page, I think something that helps me is definitely writing down an example. So either something like this or like this. I'm going to assume that you don't naturally speak Latin. And I would also note these prefixes and have that written down as well, like so, right? So let's try another problem. Go ahead and pause the video and then see if you can figure this one out. So find the name for S2F10. This is also a covalent molecule. Okay, so I've added the notes to kind of help me identify the name. So this is the order of where I'm going to input things. So starting with the first elements, I have S2. Second element is going to be F10. So S2, I'm going to look for the elements S, and it is going to be sulfur. Sulfur is my first element. Whoops, that was the wrong color. S for sulfur. So notice this time I have two sulfurs. So here it says add prefix if two or more of elements. So I have at least two sulfurs, and the prefix is going to be di. So di-sulfur. Right. So for the second element, F, what is F? Checking your periodic table. F is still called fluorine. Gonna drop the last syllable, so fluorine is going to be fluoride. How many F's do I have? I have 10 F's. So the prefix for the number 10 is going to be deca. So my full name for this one is going to be disulfur decafluoride. So at this point, you should be able to complete the quiz questions at the end of these slides.